Well, hello there, and welcome to another Minecraft tutorial. In this episode, we're going back to command blocks a bit, as you can see. Basically, in the Minecraft 1.11 snapshots, we got this cool addition to the title command. Hold on. So for those who don't know, the title command is what you use to put messages up on the screen, but not in the chat. So it's the ones that show up usually in the middle of the screen. But we got a cool addition to the title command in 1.11. So this does only work in 1.11. Let me quickly find where that one was. There it is. So the title command lets you put JSON text, which means text that can be formatted with colors and bold, underline, italic, all that stuff. And it also means you can insert scores into text. And you can put JSON text on the screen, usually in the center of the screen. But in 1.11, we got this extra parameter for the title command called the Actionbar. Now the Actionbar is actually right above your hotbar, and it's the place where you see things like you cannot sleep, there are monsters nearby, or press shift to unmount when you get on a horse, or stuff like that. So, I don't know if you can see my mouse. I hope I'm recording my mouse, but it would show up right here above the hotbar. So I thought that is the perfect place to have a timer. And so as it turns out, making a timer is easy, but a little more nuanced than you might expect, mostly because numbers under 10 need to be padded with a 0, numbers above 10 don't need to be, and actually that adds a little bit of complexity, but not too much. So I'm going to show you guys what I mean. So let's have the timer start, and in this case I'm adding 20 seconds to the clock, but if you look, you can change this number to whatever you want. 400 ticks is 20 seconds. So if I click this, you'll see right there above my hotbar there's a timer that is counting down, and that's just going to keep counting down. And you'll see it follows me wherever I go, which is kind of cool, just like the title command, but it's much less in your face. So I'm pretty sure you guys heard that. I'm pretty sure I've recorded that. You should have heard the timer, when it got down to below 5 seconds, started ticking or beeping. And when it hit 0, you heard the Enderman die, which I just picked a random Minecraft sound. You can pick any Minecraft sound you want. You can make it do whatever you want when the timer hits 0. I just had to play a Minecraft sound and teleport me to this block. Now, these last two conditional blocks, this is where you change it to do whatever you want when the timer hits 0. In this case, I'm teleporting the player to that block, and I'm playing the Enderman death sound, just because I feel like it's a very nice game over, time's up sound. Again, you can use whatever sound in Minecraft you want, or if you're making a custom map with a resource pack, you can always add your own sound events and use those. And obviously it doesn't have to play a sound, you can do whatever you want. I just thought it would be cool to have the timer tick down silently, but once you got down to 5 seconds or less, to start actually ticking down to let the player know that they're running out of time. And this is fully configurable, so you can make it start ticking at whatever time you want. And I'm going to show you how to do it. So the first thing we have here is a repeat block that just tests to see if the timer has one tick left or not. When it hits 0, we don't need to run this anymore. We don't want the timer to show up on the action bar just showing 0, 0 all the time. So we just test to see if there's at least one tick left on the timer, and then if not, the rest of this entire chain doesn't get executed, so we don't have 0, 0 displayed all the time. But if there is at least one tick left on the timer, then this conditional repeat block triggers. Now, conditional repeat blocks are something that aren't used very often, but they're very useful. What a conditional repeat block will do is it will run 20 times per second, and it will trigger all chain blocks attached to it, but only if the block behind it is successful. So in this case, we're checking to see if there's at least one tick left, and if there is, as long as there is, then 20 times per second this chain will run. As soon as this is false, i.e. the timer has run out, then this repeat block will actually turn off and this whole chain will turn off. So it allows you to turn on and off an entire chain with a single conditional. So it's actually very useful. But in this case, we are having that repeat block remove 1 from our timer ticks value. So this is just counting down the timer every tick. And then we have this command, scoreboard players operation, and we're taking the timer's seconds score and we're setting it equal to the number of ticks left. So if we look here and we list our objectives, this is my redstone testing world, so there's quite a few test objectives, but the important ones here are we have seconds, we have minutes, and we have ticks. So we have these 3 dummy objectives that we're going to be using to keep track of the different parts of the time. So every tick we remove 1 from the timer ticks, and then we set the seconds equal to the ticks. Now obviously seconds are not ticks, so we need to divide by 20. So for that, we do another scoreboard players operation, but this time we do timer seconds divided by equals, so set it equal to the seconds divided by 20. So in this case we have a fake player called 20, which has a tick score of exactly 20. So in that case, all I did to set this up was I did scoreboard players set hashtag 20, which is our fake player, and we're going to set that ticks value to 20. And so we're going to be using ticks as our objective for all of the constants, all of the values that don't change, like 20 and 60. So we would also set up one for 60, because we're going to need to divide by 60 to convert seconds into minutes. So we have 60 ticks equals 60. And so this allows us to set up some constants to do some math with. So again, we are dividing, we're setting seconds equal to the number of ticks left on the clock, and then we're dividing that by 20 because there are 20 ticks in a second. So this is putting the full number of seconds on the seconds, on the seconds objective for the timer. Then we set the minutes equal to the total number of seconds, and then we mod that, or sorry, let me do this in a different order. We set the minutes equal to the total number of seconds, and then we divide that by 60. So obviously seconds divided by 60 is the same as minutes because there are 60 seconds in a minute. But then once we do that, the seconds objective still has the total number of seconds. So if that's like 500 or something, that's more than a minute. So we want to get rid of everything except the actual seconds that are left. So what we do for that is we use modulo. So we have seconds mod, that's what this symbol is, seconds mod 60. So what modulo does is it's the remainder after division. It's a mathematical thing. It's not just a programming thing, but it's used often in programming because it's useful. So basically this says, okay, we take the number of seconds left on the clock, we divide it by 60, and then whatever the remainder is, that's what we put back in the seconds objective. So it's the remainder. So it's just basically getting rid of all of the minutes, and then whatever seconds are left over is leaving that in the seconds objective. So this gives us our full minutes and our full seconds. So now what we want to do is we have to separate our title commands between less than 10 seconds and more than 10 seconds, because less than 10 seconds has an extra 0 before the number. So it's like 305, not 3:5, 3:05. But if it's more than 10 seconds, you don't say 3019, right? You say 319. So we have to separate those two. So first we test if it's greater, if the number of seconds left is greater than 10. And if so, we run this command. And now this puts the title in the action bar. In this case, I'm just doing the nearest player. In your map, if it's multiplayer compatible, you might want to put it as all players. Doesn't really matter in my case because it's a single player world. In your case, you might want to change who gets to see this. But we put it in the action bar. And here's where the JSON comes in. Now this is a little complicated if you've never worked with JSON titles before or JSON text. But basically what we're saying is the first part of our text that we're going to show in the action bar is a score. And we're going to take that score from the minutes objective of the player named timer. So this is our fake player, and minutes is our scoreboard objective that holds the number of minutes. So it basically says, okay, look for the score in the minutes objective of the player named timer and display that first. And then after that we say, oh, and by the way, we have some extra text to add besides just that. And then this square bracket means we're starting a list, an array, just a list of more text to add. So after the minutes, the next thing we add is just plain text, which is a colon. That's to separate our minutes from our seconds. And then remember, this is when the score for the seconds objective, so the number of seconds left, is greater than 10, so we don't need to put an extra 0 in there. So we just go straight to adding another score, which is the seconds objective in our timer player. So it's exactly the same as before when you saw the minutes, except now we're looking for the seconds. And then we end our list, and we end the whole text tag. So all that does is put in order the minutes score, a colon, and then the seconds score. So when we're above 10 seconds, because of this, when we're above 10 seconds, this conditional block will show in the action bar the title that is minutes colon seconds. So then we have a test for if the seconds is between 0 and 9. So that's below 10 seconds. If we're below 10 seconds, we do pretty much the same thing. The only difference is we have the minutes, we have the colon, but then before we put in the second score, we're going to insert this text that is just a 0. So it's just hard-coded, just going to be a 0 inserted between the colon and the seconds. And then this is exactly like it was before, adding seconds, closing the list, and closing the tag. So this little trick allows us to have it count down properly, so that if the number of seconds is greater than 10, it'll show up just the number of seconds, but if it's less than 10, it'll pad it with a 0. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And remember, these two title commands are conditional because we want this one to only run if the seconds is greater than 10, and this one to only run if the seconds is less than 10. So those must be conditional. Yeah. Now, if you wanted to get into the hours display, then things get a little more complicated because you have the case where the minutes is less than 10 and needs to be padded with a 0, and the seconds is less than 10, or the minutes is greater than 10 and the seconds is greater than 10, or minutes is less than and seconds is greater, or seconds is less than and minutes is greater. So you have 4 possible situations here. So what you can do for that is you can chain these conditional command blocks together. So in this case, I'm checking for seconds less than 10. You could put another conditional command block right here that tests for minutes less than 10, and then have your conditional title pad both of them. And then you could do that for all 4 combinations, but it gets more complicated. But overall, if you're counting down seconds, I don't think you're ever going to need to have a map that goes on for hours at a time. So you probably aren't going to need that, but it is possible. It just takes a lot more conditional blocks. But that's fine. For this case, we're going to assume that we're not doing more than an hour on the timer, so we only need to check for the seconds being less than 10. Otherwise, the minutes is the first number, so we don't ever need to pad it with a 0. Okay, so that's the explanation for the actual timer display. Now we have the beeping that happens when you get down below 10 seconds. So the way we do that is we actually don't want to look at the seconds, because if you have more than a minute on the clock, you might have, say, 5 minutes and 4 seconds left, but we don't want it to actually start ticking until it's 0 minutes and 4 seconds. And now we can do that different ways. We can have two conditionals chained together that checks for minutes of 0 and seconds less than 5. But what I'm doing is we're already storing the absolute number of ticks left. So we're just going to use that directly because the number of ticks doesn't get moduloed, and it doesn't get divided by anything. It's just the raw time left. So we can use that to our advantage. So we're going to create this fake player called Ticker that will keep track of the ticks on the timer. And then we're going to take the ticker's ticks and we're going to modulo it by 20. So there are 20 ticks in a second. So this will tell us how many seconds are left total. Not just how many seconds are left in addition to the minutes, but the total number of seconds left on the clock. And so now we test when that equals 0. And conditionally, yes. So if that equals 0, that means that there are, I'm actually a little confused by my own command blockery here. We're testing if the ticks mod 20 is 0. Which is the number of seconds, but then we have conditionally we play the pling sound if the timer ticks are between 1 second and 5. Honestly, I know this is a tutorial and I should know what I'm doing, but I've told you before I don't really have time to edit these, so this is going to be unedited, and I'll admit I'm not quite sure why I'm testing if the ticker ticks equals 0. Oh, yes I do. I'm being stupid. My explanation before about why we're doing mod 20 here was completely wrong. Ignore me. I'm recording at 3 a.m. My brain stopped working for a moment. No. So what we're doing here is we're taking the ticker's ticks mod 20. Now the ticker ticks before was set to the timer's tick, so that's how many ticks are left on the clock. We're doing mod 20 not to get the number of seconds. No, that's not right. Mod 20 is the number of ticks within each second. So if it's, let's say, 25 ticks left on the clock, that's 5 ticks into the first second, because the first second is the first 20, and then it's 5 more ticks. So this is remainder after division. We divide by 20 is the number of seconds, and then we take the remainder, which is the number of ticks left. And so then we can test if the ticker ticks is equal to 0. And what that tells us, if the ticker ticks is equal to 0, then we're exactly on a second. So it either just changed from like 5 seconds to 4, 4 seconds to 3, 3 seconds to 2, whatever. The number of seconds has just changed. If we don't do this, then this is actually going to run every tick, and it's going to run 20 times a second, and instead of hearing ding, 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 you're going to hear ring, which is not what you want. So yeah. So set the ticker ticks to the total number of ticks left on the clock. Mod it by 20 to get how many ticks into a second we are. And then make sure it's 0. So we are 0 ticks into a second, which is exactly on the second. So every time that happens, which should be once per second, every time it counts down, we then check if the number of ticks is between 21 and 120. So 20 would be 1 second, but we don't want it to actually count 20. We want it to be inside of the first second or above. So we do 21 ticks to 120 ticks, which is the 5th second, because 120 divided by 20 is 5. No, it's 6. We go up to the 6th second. but just like this is 21 and not 20 because we don't want it to count below the first second, we also don't want it to count, we also want to make sure it counts up to the 5th second and into right below the 6th second. So we divide it by 20, and that would be 6 seconds, but it's just below that. So if we are 1 to 5 seconds, then we conditionally play this pling note, which is the ding sound, but we execute it at all players, and we play the sound to the nearest player. And the reason we do that is if you just play sound, it's going to play it from either the position of this block, or it's going to play it from some position that you give it, because you can always specify an X, Y, Z. But if you hard code the position, then as the player's moving around, they might go too far and they're not going to hear it. So if you want to make sure every player hears it full volume, you execute it from the players and then play it to the nearest one. So every person will play it to themselves, and it'll execute from the position that they're currently at. So they're definitely going to hear it. And then we check if the timer is exactly 19, which is just changed to 0. Because when you do the division earlier to figure out how many seconds are left, it actually is going to round down. So when you're at 20, it's going to round down to 1. But when you hit 19, divided by 20 is going to be slightly less than 1, and it'll round down to 0. So as soon as it changes from 1 to 0, i.e. when the number of ticks on the timer is 19, that's when you do whatever you want to do to end the timer. You know, when the timer ends, what happens? In this case, I'm teleporting the player to a hard-coded position, which is right over there. And then I am playing the Enderman death sound. And these are just conditional, and you can chain together as many conditional command blocks as you want after this, and they will all get run only once and only as soon as you hit 0 on your timer. So you can make it do whatever you want. Kill the player, reward the player for surviving that long, or teleport the player back to a starting position. You know, do whatever you want. Give the player free gold, because why not? Yeah, so that's how it works. And again, to actually start the timer, you just set the timer ticks to however many ticks you want the timer to run for, and it'll automatically convert the timer ticks into seconds and minutes. It'll count down and display the timer, and once it gets down to below 5 seconds, it'll tick off in, audibly. And when it ends, it will perform whatever ending function. So this is how you get a nice little timer to display in an unobtrusive place down above your hotbar using the 1.11 Actionbar titles. So hopefully it wasn't too confusing, even though I did confuse my math a little bit. Hopefully it still made sense. And until next time, keep counting down and keep redstoning.